Okay, so let's dive into this UnitedHealthcare CEO shooting. It's everywhere right now. It's more than just a headline, though, right? It feels like it's a symptom of something, I don't know, deeper.
It's a sickness in our society. It
Yeah.
really does. Makes me think of the prophet Amos, railing against those who trample the needy
Mm.
and, pervert justice.
Wow, that's a powerful comparison. So we're talking about more than just a crime here, like a moral crisis.
Exactly. In this case, it throws a spotlight on some uncomfortable truths about healthcare in America.
Right, with Brian Thompson, the CEO, shot outside of New York Hilton,
hmm
and then Luigi Mangione, the suspect, found with a ghost gun and a manifesto.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
So walk me through this. What makes this case so different, so alarming?
Well, it's not just the shooting itself, but the evidence they found on Mangione. You know the 3D printed ghost pen? Practically untraceable, the suppressor. Fake AD, this wasn't some random act of violence. This was calculated. Planned.
And then there's that handwritten manifesto.
Right.
What have we learned about that?
Reports say it's basically a scathing critique of the American healthcare system, filled with anger, frustration. You really get a picture of a man who felt deeply wronged, maybe even desperate.
It's chilling, especially when you consider the social media frenzy surrounding this case. What have you noticed in that space?
Oh, it's a battlefield of opinions out there. A lot of people are praising Mangione as some kind of folk hero. But what's really concerning is the discovery of all these fake accounts, amplifying this narrative. It's like someone is deliberately manipulating public perception.
Yeah, we've seen this before, haven't we? One shocking event,
Yeah.
and social media becomes a breeding ground for misinformation and division.
It's true. And you know what Proverb says? A perverse man stirs up dissension and a gossip separates close friends. We need to be discerning about the information we consume and share, especially in a time like this.
You mentioned a poll earlier, something about public perception of this shooting being skewed,
Yeah.
especially among young people.
Yeah, the Emerson College poll, it found that a surprisingly large percentage of young voters, over 40%, believe the assassination was at least somewhat acceptable.
Wow, that's a sobering reminder of how easily manipulated our collective conscience can be. This is a powder keg, a horrific act of violence, a seemingly unstable suspect, a public swayed by misinformation, and a healthcare system ripe for criticism. What happens next?
Well, legally speaking, Mangione is facing dual prosecution, meaning he's being tried for the same crime twice. Once in state court for murder as an act of terrorism, and once in federal court for murder, which could carry the death penalty.
That sounds unusual. What's driving that decision?
It's a clear message from the authorities that this type of violence will not be tolerated. It speaks to the gravity of the situation, but also raises questions about the influence of the insurance industry.
Wait, hold on. The insurance industry. What role do they play in this legal battle?
There are reports suggesting that the industry pressured the Department of Justice to pursue the most severe charges against Mangione, possibly as a deterrent to others.
Wow. It makes you wonder if this is truly about justice or about powerful entities protecting their interests.
It's a reminder of Ecclesiastes. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all.
It feels like there's a deeper conversation to be had here about the role of money and power in our healthcare system
Yeah,
and how it impacts everyday people.
absolutely. And that's where we need to dig deeper. As we delve deeper into this American healthcare system, it's like we're staring into the valley of dry bones from Ezekiel's vision, a system desperately in need of resurrection.
It's heavy stuff. Reading through these sources, you really start to feel the weight of the crisis. Millions struggling with costs, access, basic trust.
Exactly. And these struggles, they're not just statistics, they're people's lives.
Yep.
Families forced into impossible choices. Proverbs tells us, the rich rules over the poor and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. We're seeing that play out in a very real way. With medical debt,
Yeah, one article highlighted a study. That said, medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy here in the U.S. How can that even be the reality in a supposedly advanced nation?
it's a stark indictment of our priorities. We've allowed a system to flourish, where profit takes precedence over people, turning healthcare into a commodity, instead of the basic human right it should be.
So where does that leave someone like Mangione, who represents so many feeling abandoned by this system? I mean, violence is never the answer, but I can understand the desperation.
Of course. And while we condemn his actions, we can't ignore the societal frustration that fueled them. The prophet Isaiah spoke out against those who grind the faces of the poor, and sadly, that resonates with the experiences of far too many today.
Okay, so we've laid out the problems. What about solutions? These sources offer a few paths forward, but it's hard to know where to even begin fixing something this broken.
Like Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, we need to approach this with both a clear vision and practical steps. First, we must acknowledge the moral bankruptcy of the current system. Can we call ourselves a just society when people are financially ruined by illness?
It feels like this case, as awful as it is, has at least forced people to start asking those hard questions.
Exactly. This is our Kairos moment, our opportune time. We can move beyond blame and political maneuvering towards genuine solutions centered on human dignity.
Some sources advocate for a single-payer system, others stricter regulations on insurance companies. What are your thoughts on the most effective approach?
There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we need a system reflecting the values of Leviticus. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That means guaranteeing access to quality healthcare for all, regardless of their economic status.
Beyond the policy debates, there's also a need for a shift in mindset, right?
Yeah.
How we as individuals view health and our responsibility to each other.
Absolutely. We've been conditioned to see healthcare as a transaction, a service we purchase. But true health encompasses the physical, mental, and spiritual, as the proverb says. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones.
That brings up an interesting point. Several sources mention holistic healthcare. What does that look like in practice? Especially given the mess we're in now. Welcome back. For the final part of our deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground, from the UnitedHealthcare CEO shooting to the systemic issues plaguing our healthcare system. But now, let's shift our focus to action. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this, but, the scriptures remind us that even small acts of faithfulness can make a difference.
Absolutely. Like the story of the widow's mite. Her small offering was valued by God because she gave sacrificially. In the same way, each of us can contribute to healing our broken healthcare system.
So let's get practical. What steps can we take, starting today, to make a real impact?
Well, first, we must become informed advocates. We need to understand the issues, our rights as patients, and hold our elected officials accountable. Proverbs reminds us, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. We can't afford to be silent.
Right, and I know there are a lot of resources available online and through community organizations. We'll be sure to share some links in the show notes for you.
Another powerful tool is our spending power. We can choose to support companies that prioritize ethical practices and align with our values. We can also use our consumer choices to promote a more holistic approach to health and well-being.
It's like that principle of sowing and reaping, isn't it? The choices we make every day have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us.
Precisely. We can choose to support companies that treat their employees fairly, offer affordable healthcare plans, and focus on preventative care. We can also make informed decisions about the food we eat, the products we buy, and the time we invest in caring for our own physical and mental health.
And speaking of caring, I think there's a huge opportunity to create more supportive and resilient communities. Galatians 6:2 tells us, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. How can we apply that principle to healthcare?
It starts with recognizing that we're not just individuals, we're part of a larger body. We can check in on our neighbors, volunteer at local organizations that provide healthcare services to the underserved, and advocate for policies that strengthen our social safety net.
We began this deep dive with a tragic event, but you mentioned hope earlier. I want to cling to that. What gives you hope for the future of healthcare in this country?
What gives me hope is the growing awareness of the problem, the willingness of people from all walks of life to engage in these conversations, and the increasing number of healthcare professionals who are embracing a more holistic approach to medicine.
That's encouraging. There are glimmers of light breaking through the darkness.
And remember, even in the darkest of times, we have a God who is a healer, a comforter, and a provider. We can draw strength from Psalm 103. He forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases. He redeems your life from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion.
That's a beautiful reminder. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has challenged your thinking and inspired you to take action. Remember, change starts with each of us. May you go forth with renewed purpose and a commitment to being a part of the solution.